Okay everyone, welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're back on GT Sport and we're going to be looking at two recent races in the FIA series. One in the Nations and one in the Manufacturer. So for the Nations one first, we're looking at the, I think it was the N300 race at Willow Springs. It was basically a one car race, although there was some people using the SFR also, which was pretty good, but it just ran out of tyres towards the end. However, what I want to do on these videos is we're going to talk about the race as well. But a lot of what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the settings involved with FIA at the moment. I think they're getting a little bit too boring in my view. They're becoming very static, the races. I think they're too short. I think qualifying is determining too much in the races that are going on. If you qualify top 5, you're pretty much guaranteed to finish towards the front, unless you make a big mistake. And I feel like there's no because there's no pit stops, there's no strategy, there's no even if we don't want massive fuel saving or massive tyre wear, but we want something where you can do maybe, pit 2 laps earlier than everyone else and get a little bit of an undercut and then struggle on tyres at the end and stuff like this. I do enjoy that, although I just don't want them to go back to the extreme tyre wear. I think they just need to find the compromise, and one of them compromises is by increasing the race distance, so keeping quite low tyre wear and maybe increasing these races to 25 to 30 minutes long. I don't think we should be going to an hour-long race. I would love that, although I think for the general, massive game, people that play the game, I think it's too much. I think a lot of people would struggle to get the practice in for that, understanding strategy, and I think that's just a little bit asking too much of your average player that plays the game. So I think, but 25 to 30 minute races I think should be fairly simple. Get a one-stop strategy in there, and just make it so that you can pit within a window of 4 to 5 laps, so people can pit early and then try and get a massive undercut on people and then struggle at the end, or you can maybe make your first stint last a bit longer and then pit later and have really good tyres towards the end. They just need something just to spice these races up a bit. As you can see in this race, we qualified P8. PR1 in front of us actually got lucky. They managed to get past P7. P7, who's in P7 now, struggled massively at the start of this race. For the first lap, he seemed to be I don't know what it was, but he had good pace, but he just struggled on lap 1, and that lost us the slipstream battle to P5. Now, because of this race was road cars, they run these races on a weak slipstream. Now, weak slipstream actually means it's stronger than real. Real slipstream is the weakest setting, and weak is stronger than real. So you pick up a slipstream from about 1.5 seconds, I think it is, when you're running weak slipstream, and that's quite a big margin. And what happens, you have an effect on GT Sport where if you've got 2 cars in front of you and you're about 8 tenths back from them, you get a massive boost from the weak draft from them, and it just basically causes very static races. And I think what they need to do for these road car races is get rid of that weak slipstream. We don't want it. I think these races would be much better with the real slipstream. Make it less severe, so you can actually see the difference between drivers. So if there's a car that's not qualified as high up as they should, they can then overtake. In this situation that you have now, as long as a slow car has got 2 cars in front of him and he's picking up the slipstream, you just end up picking up such a draft. You'll see I tended to struggle on this final corner, but because of the slipstream I am able to just crawl back up along the straight and close up onto PR1, and it's just a situation where it's becoming very train-like, the racing, because the races are so short as well. I mean, these lap times are what, 1 minute 20s, just over 124s, 125s, and the race is 11 laps. So this race was about 15 minutes long, and that's actually longer than some of the races we've been having on GT Sport like recently. So I think they just need to be increasing the race distance. I think what they've done in terms of reducing the tyre wear is good. They clearly listening to people, because we were all very, it was getting too much, the tyre wear situation that we were running. However, I think they need to find a compromise with the race distance. That they went the wrong way. What they've done, they got rid of the tyre wear and stuff like that and some of the fuel for some of these races, but then decided to make the races shorter, which is baffling, because I don't know who at Polyphony thinks that is a good idea. When you're decreasing them settings, you need to make the races longer to create strategy. Have a pit stop in there. These races at the moment are just a little bit, in my opinion, a little bit static, and they're not as enjoyable to be involved with as we skip through to lap 6 there now. And you can see the race now is still it's pretty much the same as it was 3-4 laps ago at the start of the race. You can see the battle at the front where they broke that slipstream because of the battle that we had at the start of the race. and then the battle that I'm in here now, where I seem to lose out on the straight, but then I pick up the draft, and I was really strong through the middle sector. You'll see now as we follow this lap, I tended to be able to gain a bit of time on the middle sector. So through the corners, this first corner I tended to gain a bit, was able to get nicely on the power, then this long right hander, and then into the really tight complex section. That was kind of the section where I tended to pick up a bit of speed, but the final corner was where I was suffering in terms of my race pace. But you can see here, taking a very tight line to corner and trying to figure a way at how we're going to be able to make a move on P7, because he's picking up the slipstream from P6. So it just seems it's just really difficult to find anywhere to overtake, because unless you just wipe them out of the race, which is not what you want to do. I'm like working the car around, trying to have a look, see where he's weak, and the middle sector seems like somewhere where I'm going to be able to make, if a move's going to be possible, it's the only real place I'm going to be able to go for it in this race. As we now work our way towards the end of lap 7, you can see one interesting thing as well. You can see it's so static, the race, that I think it was lap 2 or 3, we were about 4.8 seconds behind the #1 car, probably the fastest car in one of the fastest drivers in road cars. And because of that slipstream, we've only lost about a second to him. Now I should be losing more than that over the space of 6 laps towards the driver in P1, because I'm not that fast in road cars. If I wasn't in a slipstream, I'd probably be about 3-4 seconds behind at this stage. And we've only lost about half a second, 0.6 of a second, purely because of the strength of that slipstream as we now work our way to start lap 8. And again, it's something that they need to work on. They need to figure out something for these settings as we now skip towards the start of lap 9. Now this is the opportunity I had in this race to go for an overtake, and this is what it kind of leads to, just risking something to try and get a massive advantage. As you see, going through this corner, I went really wide here and decided to like really be aggressive through this long right hand corner. You can see getting on the power, trying to get it to bite into the apex, but then you start picking up a bit of loss of aero behind the car in front, and I just decided to keep my foot on the throttle and see if we could hold it round the outside. It just wasn't possible. We lost a bit, we got understeer and ran off, but I felt like that was the opportunity I had, was just to go for it and see what happened. And you can see now I've got a lot of dirt on the tyres, so struggling for grip. You can see that the delta's just increasing now, where I just can't get on the power, it's sliding around, and it's going to go to about 1.2 seconds because we obviously went off track. And it was just one of them. I thought I might as well try it. If it fails, it fails. It was the only opportunity to really get an overtake done in this race with the way it was going, and we've dropped back a bit as we now skip through to lap 11, and you can see the end of lap 11, and you can see we've not really the start of lap 11 this is, we're about 1.4 seconds behind, so we lost about 2 tenths there. We're just outside the slipstream. We're basically verging on being outside the slipstream range on this final lap now. But again, you see through this sector, even though I didn't do this quite so well, I actually managed to gain a few tenths on this middle sector, where I've just been pretty much stuck since that mistake on them a couple of laps there, within about 1.2 to 1.4 seconds range behind P7. And you can see we're 5 seconds clear of TRL Org, so there was not really much point in pushing too aggressively. Now we've got this position covered. It wasn't going to increase my points in the nations, and it was a bit of a boring race, if I'm brutally honest. That was my thought about this race. It didn't really feel, because it was just so static. The cars were entertaining to drive here. I did like the combination in terms of the way the car and the track. However, the settings ruined this race. They needed more laps, maybe something like 18 laps would have been really good around this track with these cars, because it would have basically have needed a pit stop, and it would have just made more options available to when you pitted. You wouldn't have had to have pitted dead on lap 9. You could have pitted lap 8, lap 9 or lap 10, either way you wanted to do it, and it would have made it much more interesting in my personal opinion. We came home with a P8 in that FIA race, so now we're going to skip through to the manufacturers race. Now the points we got in that nations race, again, when they weren't enough, it was just, I think it was around just under 2k, it might have even been 2k, I think it was like 1.9k, something like that, and that wasn't enough to boost my ratings in the nation. So now we've got the manufacturers race, which again, this was a bit of a this was the second slot of the day. However, slot 1 got 2 disconnections, which meant everyone was back into this slot because no one wanted to settle for the points that they got in slot 1. So we had Lightning, everyone in it. Just look how close this qualifying is. You can see 54.2, very good lap. I think the most I could have got out of this was a 54.4 to 5, but we didn't quite hook our lap up in this qualifying session. You can see from this point now, from P6 a 54.4, you're going to see how close this is through the grid. So a temp separating P4, P5 and P6 and 7, and then Tigany there 54.5. Look how close this is, basically hardly any gap between these cars at the moment, and it was like this all the way down through the grid pretty much to P13. We actually helped WDP boost his qualifying a bit because he gained our slipstream all the way through the lap. But you can see now we're down into P12 and we're still on a 54.7. I think I qualified there you go in P13, 54.7 again. So only 3 tenths of a second faster, and I would have been starting in the top 5 on the grid. That shows you just how close this qualifying is, even all the way down to P15, still within I think within a second of pole position, and that pole position time was pretty decent by Lightning. It wasn't as good as his first attempt. I think in split 1 he actually managed, in the slot 1 he managed a 53.8, which is an insane pace. But Lightning's always been extremely fast around this track, I've always found, so it was no surprise to see him doing that kind of lap time. But also a very good lap by Storm, I think, in the Mercedes. Mercedes a very good car at this track, however still a very good lap in that car to put that high up the grid on a lap time that he did. So we're starting from P13, and again we're in a pretty similar situation to the race at Willow Springs. So for this race obviously we need to concentrate on tyre wear, so you can see that brake bias all the way to the front, and again 8 laps. Now this is really it's disappointing, I think, because when I first started doing FIA on this game, this was just basic FIA races, it used to be about 11 laps at this track, so they were about 22 minutes in distance. Wasn't perfect, I felt like they could have been longer still, but they were better than this because at least you had a pit stop and you could go either lap 5 or 6, and it added a bit of strategy into the race. But this now is a no-stop race, flat out to the end, and it's just again it's too static because there's no real all that's going to separate people in this race is basically the tyre wear and whether the car's better in the race conditions. You see the Porsche in front of me, one of the better cars at this track, probably. I think in terms of race pace it can be extremely strong around this track, one of the strongest cars. I do like the Porsche at this track, it really does handle well, even with the change in physics that car has had. It's still really good in race conditions, and that's why it's, in general on daily races, it's still very strong when you use it at certain tracks. As we now work our way, just trying to keep it nice and consistent. We've got the other Ford GT behind us, and you're going to see managing to keep that the other Ford out of the slipstream range right from the start of this race, and just was able to control the gap to him. But what we've got to try and do is see if we can make progress towards Jomas. Really, I didn't think we'd be able to do much about the Porsche in front of me because I know that car is going to be better on tyres than the Ford GT, but I do know that the Jaguar that Jomas is in, and also WDP that's up ahead of Jomas, is going to actually struggle a bit in this race because of one, the I knew I was faster in the race over WDP because we raced him in practice and we were able to pull away, and we obviously boosted his qualifying with that slipstream that we gave him. But Jomas was going to struggle with the front tyres, a little bit opposite to my car because I was going to struggle with the rear tyres. So through the fast corners my car was going to be able to be a bit faster, but then probably on traction zones the Jag was probably going to have that little bit of an advantage. As we now come to the end of lap 1, and you can see it's all very static. And another thing that probably causes these static races as well is the rolling starts. We've got a situation where we're having rolling starts that separate people by as much as 1 second at the start of a race, and the races are only 8 laps long. So I think it was by lap 1, you can see the end of lap 1 we're 10 seconds behind P1 because of the field spread that the rolling start creates, and that kind of, it's just making the races a little bit boring. I think that hopefully they're going to incorporate the new system into these races very soon. There is a new rolling start that they were working on with apparently a new slipstream that's I'm hoping it's a little bit weaker than what it currently is or something, because at the moment I feel like the slipstream's a bit too strong sometimes, but it's a hard one because it does create overtaking opportunities sometimes. But as we now work our way through this middle sector again, just trying to keep it nice and smooth. You can see not trying to overdrive the Ford too much in this race, because I wasn't really interested in doing the last slot. This was just a second slot, so was the Nations race we showed you before. I didn't do the last slot in them races because, to be brutally honest, they were just quite boring races, and I didn't really have the motivation to jump back on to do the 10 o'clock Nations or the 11 PM manufacturers. I'm pretty sure I could have got a better result out of both of them just by qualifying higher up, but they just weren't really they weren't entertaining enough for me to think I'm gonna stay on for another 3 hours to stream, especially when the missus needs to be up early for work and stuff. I mean, for this race I think they could have actually gone as probably up to 15 laps. I think it would have been about a 28-29 minute race, something like that. 15 lap race. They could have started the race on 50% fuel. We know that you can do that because it's in the settings. Start people on 50% fuel and maybe put the fuel to ×2, and that would mean that you could do a bit of fuel saving, but it's not going to give you massive advantage. So if your car's not very good on fuel, you can still drive quite aggressively, and you're not going to really lose too much out in the pit stop phase to the cars that are really good on fuel. And if they want to do that bit of fuel saving, they're going to be a little bit slower. But it would just open up these settings a bit, and also they could have actually lowered the tyre wear slightly then and made it so that you could pit on lap, say, pit lap 6 to pit lap, to 9, and depending on which way you wanted to go. So there was like a 3 or 4 lap pit stop range that people could go in, and this would create more alternative strategies in these races, and I think it would just make it more entertaining. As we now jump again, see we're jumping through to lap 5, and you can see this race is still so static. We've got Jonas 2.1 seconds ahead now, and we're starting to catch Jonas up at this stage, but you can see behind us we've got Bellin again in the Ford around that 1 second range, not really able to get in the slipstream. He was getting close every now and then when I was making the odd mistake, but other than that I felt like I had that covered. I felt like I had the speed to, if I really needed to push. I was trying to save my tyres a little bit for the last few laps, just so that we've got something if we get an opportunity to overtake anyone, we can push towards the end. But at the moment you can see WDP also, you can see up ahead in P10 there, starting to drop off. You can see that the Porsche is starting to gain him on this lap, and you've got obviously Jonas now. Although we're going to be closing on Jonas, he's going to have that slipstream range to the Porsche now for a few laps. And one problem I had in this race obviously was I didn't get any slipstream, so it was just a case of just driving around on your own. Same thing for Bellin behind me in the Ford, just pretty much just trying to keep it smooth and consistent, hoping that we'd have an opportunity to actually have a battle with a car. And this is another thing, if these races were longer, we could have maybe jumped in the pits on lap say 7 or lap 6 and gone for a longer stint on the second stint if they were like 15 lap races, and try to get an undercut to gain some places, and then try and defend against drivers if we had to towards the end. At least it would mean you could actually have more racing opportunities, more strategies, more cars that maybe did a bit of fuel saving or didn't do fuel saving and stuff like that. We just need something. We don't want exaggerated tyre wear, we don't want exaggerated fuel saving, we just want a little bit of strategy in these races rather than just being basically qualifying settles a race. At the moment we've got a situation where some of these races are basically as long as qualifying. Now I just don't see the point. If you're going to have races that are only 12 to 15 minutes long, I think we should just have a one-shot qualifying. You have one lap, you mess it up, you start at the back, something like that, because it just seems a bit pointless to. What we're doing at the moment is we're having a situation where most drivers in top split and also split 2 probably are spending 10 to 12 minutes of 10 minutes of fuel burning, and then just 2 minutes of actually driving a lap for the sake of a race that lasts the same distance. It just seems daft to have that situation, and hopefully Polyphonic can really consider increasing these race distances. We did run a poll on Twitter to discuss this, and the majority of people wanted races over 30 minutes long. For me personally, I think 25 to 30 minute races would be ideal. The next range of what people voted for was between that range. As you can see in this race, managing to get that gap down to Jonas now, almost within the slipstream range. We've got 2 laps to do this, and we're really trying to push on. One really interesting thing about the poll that I did was the lowest rate, only 6% of people wanted the races the distance that we're doing now, which is these really short races. So out of, I think it was nearly 300 votes, 6% only wanted this settings. The majority wanted between 25 and 30 and 30 and over. And I think personally, I think the 25 to 30 minute range would be great for these races. And then for the top 16 races, increase them to 40 minutes, make them a bit longer, and make them more, 2-stop strategies available and stuff like that. There's so much that they could do with these races to make them better, and it wouldn't even be that hard for them to do. It would be fairly simple, as we now getting very close to Jonas. You can see 9/10, and the frustrating thing was we were within about 1/10 of a second to picking up the slipstream. However, you can see he's got the slipstream now for the start straight behind WDP, who's really starting to struggle a bit in that Lexus, and I did expect this to happen. Like I say, we did boost him in qualifying and gave him the slipstream throughout the whole lap, and he was then able to jump a little bit further ahead. So we've managed to catch him up a bit and starting to put some pressure on Jonas, as Jonas having a little look up on the inside there on the final lap, but again not able to make that move. The start straight is a little bit too short really sometimes, and if the driver in front goes defensive, there's not much you can do. As we now manage it again, you can see that gap to belling behind over 1 second. So we've maintained that. I had that covered. I didn't really need to worry about P13 in this race. I felt like I had the speed to, if I needed to pretty much, you know, cover that one off. It wasn't like I was on the threat at all in this race. But you can see again, we're not able to get in the slipstream to Jomas. Pushing on this final lap, I really wanted to just push it and try and get as close as I could to Jomas, to it, just so we could have a little bit of a battle at some point on the race. You know, these races are so short, it'd be nice to have a battle for at least half a lap or something. But you can see he's picking up the slipstream down this little bit of acceleration zone again, which is helping him out. But it does look like WDP is suffering in this race. Looks like maybe a bit of tyre wear. And the Ford also was getting a little bit tricky to drive on power, mainly at the rear, because obviously that's where this car suffers, and why we had that 5 to the front brake bias to try and look after the rear tyres as much as possible. As we now come through to the end of this race, you can see it's been so static again. We've basically started P13, and we've drove a really solid race. If you look at the lap times, I think still in the 1 minute 55s on lap 6 was fairly solid and good driving. But it's just a case of, because of the qualifying is determining the races at the moment. I think if we would have started P5, P4, we could have got a top 5. It's just that kind of situation on the game where you feel if you qualify top 5, your race is sorted. It's that short. But you can see going through the final corner, we actually tried to really just get on the throttle a bit too earlier. I thought I might as well try and get as close as I can. We ran a little bit wide, made a mistake, lost a bit of time to the P13, but it really wasn't an issue because it was over by then, by the finishing line, you can see. But a great drive by Lightning in P1, and also an amazing drive by Velost Storm, who pushed Lightning all the way in that race, only just over a second behind him. So a great job in that car in the AMG GT3. I do know that car is very strong here, but I think he outdrove that car. But it's something I hope they get sorted in these lobbies, because FIA should definitely be a little bit longer than your daily races. But at the moment, daily races are actually about 4 to 5 minutes longer than FIA races, and that seems so backwards to me, because it's more so hardcore players that do FIA over daily races. You'll find that some people don't even bother with daily races, they're only doing FIA. So there's a lot of the stuff that needs sorting with these FIA races. I think, you know, along with the point situation and the driver rating, you know, lifting that cap that we have, and maybe going back to a single shot attempt like we used to. I think they need to just increase these distance on these races and bring some strategy back into the races, because they're coming very static. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little video. We're going to be back with more videos covering some of our other races and more live streams over the next few days. Thanks again for watching, everyone.